he beat to death almost another friend of mine. He burnt down one of my businesses because I printed something for the opposition. And when I would go out with my family anywhere, to the theater, you come into roadblocks, and the army would be there at the roadblocks, and I could see that my kids were absolutely terrified. I mean, these eyes were like scared to death. And I just reached a breaking point, essentially. I said, you know what, I'm not gonna live here anymore. But I'm not a man of means, and have never been a person of real means, and I couldn't pack up the family, quit the business, and come to the States. So I decided what every red-blooded American would do, overthrow the government. So it's like I got myself 5 friends of mine, little by little by little, we all knew each other, and I got 5 friends of mine to join me in essentially overthrowing the government through the democratic process. And we were public enemy number 1 for a couple of years. I interrupted General Noriega's State of the Union address. Imagine if your favorite non-president was give a State of the Union, and you were able to go online and broadcast your message, which was broadcast all over the country. That's what we did with Noriega's State of the Union address. It was our vote, our voice that overrode their things. We broadcast to the army, urging them to mutiny. We broadcast to all the civil servants to uprise against the government, and kept this up for a couple of years. And it was a very difficult time in our life, as Ann will tell you. But basically, I'm trying to manage my father's business, which was, the sales were down 75%, that's 75, and we had to fire most of our employees. Their banks were closed. I was trying to be a good father to my 15-year-old son, good father to my 15-year-old daughter, my 12-year-old son, 15-year-old daughter, and a good husband to my wife, and overthrow the government at the same time. That was a bear of a job.
So it was really interesting to me. A few days ago, I interviewed Ann and Kurt and their daughter Kimberly while they were all together. And you had a really interesting family dynamic going on there, because
Radio business Kimberly, in Miami. And we came back, and we arrived at the airport at the same time, but we split up. We had different seats on the plane. And it was Eastern Airlines in those days. And going to Panama was a horrible thing. I mean, it was like a dark and dungy plane, dark and dungy airport, armed people everywhere, nobody's smiling, everybody suspects the other guy is a Noriega spy. It was just a horrible, horrible place. I was fortunately, because of being married to Annie, I had a status of forces agreement card, making me independent, and I basically sailed through customs because I'm not really a Panamanian. When in fact I was a Panamanian, I was a Panamanian businessman, but these two identities never were legally matched, and which basically I just fell through the cracks. So I come down a plane and going through customs, and there's a civilian guy, then there's a military guy. The civilian guy just simply checks the passport, and the military guy has this dot matrix thing on a big fan, and he goes through it to look for your name. Now, everybody in Panama, well, not everybody, the overwhelming majority of the people in Panama were doing something overtly or covertly against the government. Everybody sweat a bucket full of sweat going through that line, because if they were on that list, you were toast. Well, I'll say about that later. But I came through there, and I handed the passport to the customs guy. He stamped it, and he slid the passport down the line as I'm walking with my passport to the soldier. And as I'm walking, I see an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, scotch taped to the glass that I can read right through. And it says, Kurt Muse, American citizen, arrested on sight. And I tell you, I was like a deer in the headlights. So I thought of all these things about escaping and all these plans. Everything, every scenario I had ended in my death. The soldier that saw it, he was freaked out as well, and he went out and got reinforcements. They came, they dragged me out of the airport and took me to interrogation. During the interrogation, they discovered that I lived nearby. And in Panama, those of you who have traveled to really third world countries, there's no such thing as 123 Main Street with a zip code. They don't exist. It's like you go to the local CVS, take 2 blocks to the right, and it's the 3rd house on the left with a red picket fence. That's the way you got around. So they couldn't come to my house. So they wanted me to take them to my house. Now, for those of you all who have children, understand that I'm taking people who are very, very bad people, who do very, very bad things to everybody, and I'm asking them to take them to my house. My 15-year-old daughter is home alone with a maid. Mom is in Miami taking care of her mom, her grandmother who was in hospice. My son is staying with a friend 5 miles away. I go there and have to take the army up there. She comes out. She had the foresight to hide an address book in her shorts, and she managed to talk her way out of the house, and later was captured, erroneously brought back, and she escaped again. And then she went into a house, and she knocked on the door, got in, and called Mom in the States.
So, if I remember from our discussion with her the other day, there was something that she said that I wanted to ask you more about, but I'll ask you now. I thought it was really interesting that she saw fear in your face, and she went up and embraced you, and she says that you said something very emphatically, said, whatever you do, don't let go of me, just stay here, hold on to me. And that she intuitively got the impression, run. When you were saying that, she was thinking, no, he's actually telling me to run. Right. And then she distracted the one colonel from the secret police and knew where your list of your network was and hid it in her shorts. And then she asked to leave, and they let her. Right. But she started running, and then the soldiers outside didn't know that she'd been told she could leave, so she got run down by.
Correct.
So really, tell us a little bit about how did you feel when you saw her being drugged back and her trying to explain to this colonel that the guys grabbed her and stuff. I mean, I just can't imagine. My heart's beating in my chest just thinking about that as a father.
Well, it's stressful situations. You remember things a little bit differently, and Kimberly remembers that, which I think is fantastic. But I remember something else. But the end is the same thing. I told her something very similar, but not exactly. And I really, whatever I said, I really wanted her to get out.
Yeah.
So she sensed that it was a father-daughter thing, and she sensed that, and she did get out. The one thing I did tell her, and I remember clearly, and I said, Kimberly, everything's going to be all right. That's the only time I've lied to my daughter. I mean, straight up, because I didn't know. And my heart was beating. I was perspiring. I was scared to death. And Kimberly sensed all of this, and she knew, and she was smart enough to take the little address book to call Mom. And because of that, Annie in the States was able to call. You can tell a story, but she called down, and 27 men, women, and children escaped Noriega's newsman, hangman, because of the bravery of a 15-year-old girl. Telling you, ladies and gentlemen, you raise your kids right. You give them the right values, they will amaze you. And this young lady, to this day, continues to amaze me. 15-year-old girl saved all of my guys.
And tell us about receiving that phone call.
The hardest call I've ever had, because I know many of you have been on the other end of a phone call and wished that you could reach out and hug them and say that everything would be okay. I was devastated, and yet I knew that Kimberly, I could tell that she knew what to do. I said, start the calls, and she did, and then call me if you have any questions. I didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah, the safe word was shopette. So everybody, when you hear shopette, Kurt's 6 guys and their families were supposed to grab important papers, don't pack, and just go to the shopette at Albrook. Kimberly started that chain, calling Kurt's colleague, and then it went about to the other 6 or 7 guys. So that was the worst night of my life, and all night long then, Kurt earlier explained how they went to the back gate of Fort Clayton, or a fort, and they were let in piece by piece. It wasn't that easy. Every maybe half hour I would get a call. Mrs. Muse, do you know tal y tal? Yes, I do. How many children does he have? Well, I really don't know. I know he's married. I think he may have 1 child. That kind of conversation went on for each of the 6 guys that were in Kurt's group until all of them were in a safe home in Fort Clayton by about 4:30 in the morning. So it was a very long night. Meanwhile, Kurt's parents, I had contacted them, and they were able to come pick up Kimberly and her brother, who was brought to the house or to the neighborhood where Kurt's parents picked them up and brought them to safety and onto the base.
Another thing I picked up from you guys was, now your family, as in your parents, had no idea what you were up to. Mm-hmm. And did your brother and his family also not know?
Nobody knew.
So, and unfortunately, Kimberly and Eric needed to rely on them to get them into safekeeping, right. And that caused a rift, because I think that they were keeping a secret from them, and they didn't much like. Can you explain? I think some of that still exist to this day.
Both my parents have passed since then, but the thing is, you have to
daily.
That's right. So we gathered as a family and stayed in Florida, and Kimberly, I immediately put Kimberly and Eric into school so that they could complete their school year and be able to move on to the next grade level. Kimberly and Eric were very aware of how much time I was spending on the phone talking to State Department and to mostly to State Department and maybe a person in another organization about what I could do. Kimberly also wanted to help. And one night, she got on the floor of our grandmother's bathroom, and she wrote the most powerful letter about how, yes, she lives in the country of Panama, but all countries deserve the right to freedom and the pursuit of happiness and democracy. And that's all my father was doing, was fighting for that, for Panama, his country, since he was 4 years old. And so through that letter, she was, which by the way, took a very roundabout approach. It got to, when you send a letter to the president, it doesn't go to the president, it goes to, somebody in the State Department from the country that it came from. So it goes to the guy at in the Panama desk at State Department, who just happened to be the soccer coach of our children in Panama. And so he gets that to the NSA director or director
National
of
Council.
Central America or whatever.
National Security Council.
National Security Council, and he gets that letter to the president. And that would be George Bush. And that letter then, this is interesting. He hadn't heard about this. And so when he received his briefing, he asked, so tell me about Kurt Muse. Well, that began an inquiry that he required every single time that he was briefed. Every week he would ask about Kurt. I followed up later with my own letter, certainly not as powerful as a letter from a daughter, a 15-year-old girl. But it was interesting because with Kimberly's letter, he answered back, and he said, and he used the word, if we are able to help, we will. But when he answered me, he said, when. That was, when you're striving for some answer, even that small word of when made the biggest difference. It was something to hold on to.
But this is a great time to ask Stan, because it's probably about that time that some information was starting to be gathered about your condition. And we'll come back to the doctor in a sec, but Stan, when were you first aware that there was an American that was being held prisoner that might require your organization's services?
Kurt was captured on April 9th, 1989. About 6 weeks after that, we started to get little tidbits of information about an American being held in a prison in Panama. As the situation developed, we were able to obtain more and more information that finally led to the conclusion there's an American there. National Command Authority says, let's put a plan together to extract this American from the prison. In doing so, there were a number of rehearsals in country, in the United States, as well as in Panama, that would lead to the execution of Acid Gambit and freeing Kurt Muse. So it was about, to answer your question, Dave, it was about the middle of May when we first started getting serious about this. But an interesting tidbit relative to the information that we were receiving was that, hey, we got this American down in Panama that was, he was running a powered radio station, he had a safe house, he had radio equipment. He didn't pay his rent in the safe house. So the landlord goes in there and finds all this equipment. It wasn't until this morning, with a discussion with Kurt, the real story on how he was eventually compromised. And so even though we thought that we had good intelligence on the way that, the reason that he was compromised, there's a grain of truth in what I just told you, but maybe Kurt can shed a little bit of light on that.
It wasn't for lack of rent. It was a long story, but we had a good conversation about that.
So I'll tell you, he's not going to tell you. In the apartment that they rented, there was a leak in the ceiling, and it was coming down, and the floor of the upper apartment was coming through the floor into the ceiling to the point where the
Tenant below. The tenant below got into the apartment and saw this transmission equipment. He was a Frenchman. And so that apartment was owned by a friend of mine. We had a fake lease and I gave him fake checks and everything. So then he called me, he said, you got to get the equipment out of there like tomorrow. So we launched an operation. We checked out the earliest flight out of Panama, something like at 5:30 or something. So we had somebody there at 4:30 sneak in, dressed as he's going on a trip. You know, they have these little bags and pack. And he disassembled the equipment, stood on the street corner, and we called him a taxi to come pick him up, and then took him to someplace else. Then he got up and went to his house. But we had a whole charade to get the equipment out. And then when they finally got there was nothing there for the officials to see.
That's crazy. So you guys started doing some rehearsals, some in the United States on mock-ups of the prison, and some you actually did in Panama. And Kelly, can you explain why was the Little Bird chosen to land the assaulters on the roof? And then, if you don't mind going into that story that where you and James banged up that helicopter, because it's a riot. I did. I had to.
Probably get feedback now, but yeah, so it was around May of '89 that I was at Fort Campbell in the 160th at the time, and Stan, of course, was at Fort Bragg, and so completely separate, but the coordination was already going on as far as I could tell, right? I was at the lower echelon on the pilot side, but so we just started doing our planning, and then started, you're doing kind of home base training, concentrating on this type of mission, landing on roofs, but they chose. The Little Bird was the right choice at this time just because of the size of the landing area. And then the landing area being the roof chosen was the roof of the prison, but it also had antennas on it. So it shrunk the available landing area down to literally the first aircraft in there. You could just squeeze 2 Little Birds onto the roof at a time. So that's kind of why we chose that. And there was 4 landing on the roof that night, but we'll get into that later. But then Dave mentioned, so during rehearsals, we started getting, now we're actually doing rotations. We're living in Panama now out of a hangar about the size of this room with all of our aircraft and then our cots and tables with, like over here, with fruit on it that had nothing but fruit flies flying everywhere. But and then so we were there for months, but we were doing rotations about 2 to 4 weeks from the aviation side, and then we eventually started doing rehearsals. And one of them, they chose a school building, right on Howard Air Force Base, which is where we were, and it was close enough to the prison replica. So we started to go in there, and then I had just got in the country, and we were trying some experimental things. So I had an experimental mask on, and those are difficult things to do, because you can barely see through them, and you got to see through your goggles. And so anyway, we came in, and I didn't know it until this trip. Stan was with me, and it was my first and only crash in my 30-year career.
So just for the audience's sake, so there has not been a Whiskey and War Stories that these weird little facts lost to history somehow connect, and it's happened with every one of them. And literally when Kelly showed up in the lobby the other day, we had just interviewed Stan, and he was talking about that little mishap landing of the aircraft he was in, and then he'll talk about another thing, that he was in an aircraft and had to get out under fire because it was overweight. And he's telling me those 2 things, and I start talking. Just in the time it took to walk from the lobby back to the interview room, Kelly and I surmised that Stan was in his aircraft for both of those events. So when we burst in the door in the interview room, I announced, "Hey Stan, this is the guy that was flying you both of those times. You got screwed over in the helicopter."
And he said he'd never fly with me again.
Kelly makes it sound as though it was a controlled landing, but sitting on one of those pods and watching the top of that building come up at a very, very fast pace, you knew it was going to hurt. The victim in that was the
Tail rotor.
tail rotor.
Yeah, so just, and of course I looked, Jim Dietrich, which is supposed to be here tonight, but he couldn't make it because he got sick. But he was the flight lead on the mission. So, and in that particular training event, I was with him in Chalk 1. And looked, of course, I got the mask and you're talking like this. And, nobody can hear anything. I couldn't see anything. And looked over and said, "Yeah, Jim, they're going to tell you the instructor pilot failed to make corrective action in time, right?" And he started to choke me about that. He got pulled out of the aircraft, so.
Well,
And by the way, that one little tidbit is one of the teachers at that school happened to be Ann Muse.
That's where they practiced on the school.
We didn't know all this till after years later.
So you guys had to sit up there in the dark with this helicopter while some crane came to lift that thing off before the kids came to school, so they wouldn't be wondering why there was a helicopter glued to their roof.
Correct.
Nice. Stan, you didn't Roger up to this, but I'm going to suspect that you were the one that ran back to the helicopter and snarkily commented, "Your tail rotor's not moving." Was that you, or was that somebody else?
I can't say. But there was a lot of concern that evening into the wee hours of the morning, because the next day was a regular school day for the school children. And now they come to school and there's an OH sitting on the roof with a broken tail rotor. That was a major operational security concern. And there were a lot of folks, probably all the way up into the highest levels of the National Command Authority, wanting to know, when are you going to get it off the roof? So anyway, they called in a Black Hawk. And
Yeah. So believe it or not, the 160th is actually really good at the recovery of these kind of things, right? It's all planned out, but they were able to sling load this thing off with a Black Hawk, and we were off that roof in a couple hours, wee hours of the morning. But
And then back to work.
yeah, back to work.
Bang it back in the shade, back to work. So let's talk a little bit about the doctor in his role.
The amount of information that Kurt was providing to the doctor, and the excellent recall the doctor had to be able to sit down and write detailed reports and schematics of what the structure looked like, the doors that opened, where the stairs were, the number of guards, where he met those guards going in, coming out. But second to that was, as Kelly indicated, we had a presence there, and that was a preparation presence, and we were afforded the opportunity of actually flying over the prison in U-860s to make it appear in just regular milk runs back and forth. And of the 23 of us that went in on that prison, I think 22 of us were able to get on those milk runs and actually see the top of that prison, which afforded us a great opportunity to further plan what we were getting ready to do.
I didn't know that. Learned something new tonight.
Well, why don't we break it
Yeah,
right there?
the amount of information that Kurt was providing to the doctor, and the excellent recall the doctor had to be able to sit down and write detailed reports and schematics of what the structure looked like, the doors that opened, where the stairs were, the number of guards, where he met those guards going in, coming out. But second to that was, as Kelly indicated, we had a presence there, and that was a preparation presence, and we were afforded the opportunity of actually flying over the prison in U-860s to make it appear in just regular milk runs back and forth. And of the 23 of us that went in on that prison, I think 22 of us were able to get on those milk runs and actually see the top of that prison, which afforded us a great opportunity to further plan what we were getting ready to do.
I didn't know that. Learned something new tonight.
Well, why don't we break
20th
it?
round, I dressed, and by the 30th round, I'm around a corner because my cell was a rectangle, but it had a little thing over here, like a little place where you do your bathroom kind of thing. And I knew that the guy that was going to shoot me had a long gun. So to shoot me, he had to come into prison. He had to walk down and hook a left and shoot me. So every prisoner has plans to escape, plan to survive, plan to this. So I had my little kung fu thing going there. And what I was going to do, I was going to come in, he's going to come around a corner, I was going to jump him, I was going to take his rifle from him, I was going to club him to death, I was going to flip over his body, I was going to put his M16 over his body, and I was going to defend myself against anybody who wanted to shoot me. About 50 people in the prison. So that was my plan. And
It sounds like a plausible plan.
But it was a plan. You know, you gotta have a plan. And so that was a plan. So I rehearsed that thing in my mind. And I got, because I'm left-handed, which is good. And so I rehearsed how I was gonna jump and I was gonna grab, but just in my mind. And so I'm around a corner, you could hear a pin drop. You could hear crickets outside. Nothing. And then all of a sudden, I hear this huge, by that time, the helicopter was already up on the thing. So my mind was kind of going into overdrive, underdrive, whatever the hell, and I heard a humongous explosion, which was them blowing the door off the top, the cupola, and then about a nanosecond later, the AC-130 started unloading on the thing across the street, and then about a nanosecond later, all hell broke loose in my little mind. Gunfire going every which way. And I realized that the gunfire was so heavy that I was standing up and I was above the window height. So I was gonna die if I didn't take cover. So the only way I could do was like get down on the ground, behind the wall. But then again, my kung fu doesn't work when you're sitting down. So I was kind of freaked out. So, and I hear these explosions inside the prison, and I hear a few screams, a few shots, a few more explosions, a few shots, and the hallway filled with this thick, white, acrid smoke. I was kind of wafting down the cell, and I'm laying like this on the ground, looking at my floor, looking at the door. And every time the 105 would hit, the AC-130 with 105 would hit the Comandancia, it'd blow more concrete into my pieces of concrete, into my cell.
Oh, wow.
So
You had debris from the, from the frag
You know,
and
just
stuff.
not big stuff, it's about that big, but
Yeah, but still.
hundreds of them. We blow in there. So, and I was like fearful like this, and then I saw these little like white lights that they're going through the smoke, and then there was an explosion because when the 105 hit across the street, it lit up my prison, it lit up my cell, and so when the thing went off, it lit the cell up, and I see these two guys. They covered the width of my cell door, and they look kind of like Darth Vader. Kind of like that guy right there. But in dark, it was kind of weird. So, and the guy says, "Moose, are you okay?" I go, "Yeah, I'm okay." He said, "Get down and blow on the door." Boom! They blow the door. They come running in. They come around the corner. They jump on me like a rug. They cover me up completely. And the guy puts his hand on my shoulder and he screams at me. He says, "Moose, we're here to take you home. But you're 9 months in this damn hole. And there's 2 soldiers, 2 American soldiers in there on me, telling me they're going to take me home." You cannot imagine the feeling I received when they told me that. These guys got me up, they put one of those big flak jacket things on me, gave me a helmet, and took me out the door. And I'd always wanted to, when I was in prison, I wanted to open and close the door, I wanted to run around, I wanted to do all these kind of things. Well, they were doing it for me. And the guy that was going to shoot me, they got him first. And up to the top of the cupola, it was not spray and slay. They flex cuffed the guards. They surrendered. So there's not that many casualties. We went up to the top. Now this is the scene. If anyone did a movie of this, you wouldn't believe it. Because if those of you who have taken your grandchildren to Disney World, or used to take your grandchildren to Disney World, you know.
Yeah.
I didn't say that.
I didn't say that.
You know that you have that had the light shows at night. The light shows. Okay, it was a light show. Better than Disney, because the lights were tracers. They were going every direction, every arc, every color, and every speed you can imagine. It was just everything. And I go into this thing, and there's a helicopter about the size of that white table over there, and it's going around, and they walk me, they escort me out like I'm somebody of import. And they're like Secret Service kind of guy taking me out, and they open, there's a little tiny hole about this big in the back of this thing, and I jump in there with another operator. 2 operators get on each side, and the pilot takes off.
Well, that's where the story gets really interesting.
Okay.
It's been kind of slow up to this point.
The guy takes it off, and then he twists to the right, sort of balances himself on the wall, and then he takes off. I'm not a military planner, a salt planner, but helicopters in my mind are like, phew, you go up. This guy's going down. I didn't understand that, but who am I to say what they're doing? And the guy's heading towards the back wall of the prison. I mean, we're going to crash into the back wall of the prison. And the guy goes, and then just one of these things, and we skid to a stop in front of the prison. And the guys get off, and they start shooting them up with the bad guys. I'm inside. The pilot gets the guys back on board.
Yeah, he said his description, James's description was, we lost lift, and so basically they hit the ground, and then they saw that there was a bus floated with PDF guys. They were using it as a fighting position. And he's like, "Oops, we got to get out of here." So he skids like driving the helicopter like a Ferrari down the street.
That's exactly.
And when it came to a stop, without telling the guys, he goes, "They did their ninja thing. They jumped out and started whooping everybody's ass, and he had to get out of the helicopter to shoo him back in. And I was like, what did you tell him? Get back in, I've got a plan. Obviously the helicopter wasn't flying.
Well, what I didn't realize is that they were still fighting when I'm in this little box back there. What I didn't realize is they didn't have time to buckle up, to hook themselves. They were fighting. So so we drove down the line. I mean, we're just skipping down the line. Got to an intersection, hooked the left. I don't know if helicopters do that, but this guy hooked the left. and there was a distance between two apartment buildings, and the thing skidded down the line, and then we took off. We got up to about 1.5 stories high, and then we were shot to hell, and then we crashed.
It wasn't me.
Did you tell him instructor pilot gave input to?
It was Jim again.
It was Jim. It was Jim again.
And it was the guys on the right were shot off the plane at 1 story high because they were hit by enemy fire, and they fell off, and they straight to the ground. And then we went about another 10 yards, and that's when we crashed. So we're crashed here, they're falling over there. The guy on the other side got spun around, and his foot was caught under the pod. And so I was with my guy inside, and I'm okay. And I said, I'm okay, give me a weapon, I know where we are. So he gave me his .45. I got out with him, and I took one step. And my buddy, because we were hanging on to one another for dear life. We were hanging on. And we took one step, and all of a sudden his whole body shook. And then he went limp. And then in my mind, I knew that he'd been hit. I mean, he got hit by a sniper or something. So I didn't want to leave. What am I going to do with a .45 all by myself in the town? I'm going to play dead with this guy. And I'm going to lay there, play dead, and if somebody comes up, then I'll pop up with the .45. I fell to the ground with him, and on the ground, his face was over here. It was all bleeding, and I go, oh my God, he's dead. Oh my God, he's dead. Oh my God. And then his eyes open, and he said, Moose, you okay? And I go, yeah. I said, what happened to you? He said, the goddamn rotor hit me. And so I look up, and the bird crashed on the pod, and it was to one side. We got up on that side. Rather than being up here, it was down here. So actually the rotor blade was about that far off the ground. So we basically had to crawl out. I dragged it out from under this thing, and then I was all alone. So I grabbed the guy, and I put him on, like, I kind of, not on my back, but sort of done like this, and then I hid out in an apartment building real close by. The guy set up a defensive position. The team lead saw that we were safe. He got everybody together, then he went and got me, and then I rejoined him with my wounded guy, and then I came into this little perimeter with one guy unconscious, one guy with a shot in the thigh, one guy who was shot in the back of the knee and had his foot crushed and cracked his elbow, and the pilot and the guy that was not hurt. Everybody that could was fighting. So if you take this, what I described to you, in a little circle, we were hiding behind an old abandoned Jeep Wagoneer, and these guys had a fighting position going with what they had. And it was amazing. It was unbelievable. And slowly but surely, these guys, gunbirds, started making passes of things and rocketing places and machine gunning places, and little by little, the opposing fire stopped. And then we heard a tracked vehicle come, and it was a plan B, and they had a plan A, plan B, plan C. They had like 17 plans, and it was a 113. It was just those boxy Vietnam era things, and they came in there and they backed up, lowered the ramp. One young spec something from some infantry company, and one unit guy. We all loaded up into this thing, and took off. The 50 was hanging like this, surrounded by sandbags, and we drove through the poorest section of Panama. I mean, like the poorest section of Panama. We were the lone American vehicle in the area, and everybody came out in their balconies to cheer us. They're just cheering us along. And I looked through that little hole where the hatch was, and I looked back at my buddies, and it was horrible. I saw the carnage in my little box. And I looked up there, and then I knew that Panama was free now. You know what I mean? It was like they freed a country. But look at the cost. And I had this enormous that, you know, I was very guilt-ridden. Go ahead.
So one of the other little things that came out from interviewing you and James and the others that you didn't know was that when the helicopter crashed, the pilots were each only armed with a Beretta and one magazine and an extra round in the chamber. So 16 rounds for each man. And when the helicopter crashed, as you said, they were unhurt, so they got out, and you guys were in sort of a channelized area, an alley. And we'll talk about the encounter with that guy that came out in a sec. But they felt like, okay, well, we can hold off some people if we have to, because we've got 32 rounds between us. So they had their guns up, and they were confident in their ability to do that. So later, when they got back to the base and were safe, the co-pilot looks at the pilot. No, vice versa. The pilot looks at the co-pilot and says, "Hey, did you download your pistol since we've been back here?" And he said, "No, why?" He goes, "Look at your pistol." And he looks at the magazine well, and there's no magazine in the gun. He pulls the slide back, and there's one bullet in it. And he goes, "Holy shit, you were holding on that territory with one bullet." And the co-pilot looks at the pilot and says, "Did you download your gun since you've been back?" And he's like, "No, why?" He goes, "Look at your gun." Magazine gone, pulls the slide back, one round. So they literally had 2 rounds between them to hold off the bad guys. They had no idea the impact was such that the magazine releases got bumped and their magazines went flying. Crazy story. You've got to tell the magic 45, this 45 story, how the 45 almost took a ride without its owner.
When we landed?
Yeah, because you still had the 45 when you got back to
The one story which is very, very powerful that will take 2 minutes to tell. When we finally got to the casualty collection area, the radio telephone, the radio guy on the 113 called higher headquarters, and he said, "We have the PC at LZ Juliet," or was it? Yeah, LZ. "We have the PC at LZ Juliet." I repeat, "We have the PC at LZ Juliet." And I thought that was it stayed with me, and I wanted to see what time it was, and I lost my watch in the crash. So I grabbed the driver's wrist and looked at his watch. It was 1:45. Okay. So then they take us back to Howard Air Force Base, and I have a KIA from one of the infantry regiments, and one of the unit guys over here. He's down with a blanket over with an IV, and I'm holding his IV. And we take off. This guy gets up, reaches across, grabs me by the neck, and squishes me down. And he told me he had to do that to minimize my profile for a sniper. What kind of people do that? You know, you're laid down in a stretcher. Anyway, so I was amazed. So we get to our destination. We're all triaged. Everybody gets gone. And I had the gun in my waist here. So I took it out. I put it on the net seats, and I was walking out. And the guy was hit on the head. He came kind of out of the smoke, and he's walking. He's all bloody. And he comes up to me and he says, "Where's my 45?" So the helicopter's taken off. So I go, stop. He comes back down, and I look around the place, and I grab this 45 like this gingerly, and I hand it to him. He's all like this. He goes, he puts it in his thing, and he turns around and walks back into the dust. I'm like, who are these people? So anyway, the Okay.
Now, you said that you wanted to see the guys that were wounded while you could.
I'm a civilian. I didn't know where to go, what to do with this guy there, and he was the commander of the unit at that, deputy commander of the unit at that time. And he said, for some strange reason, why would you say this to me? He says, is there anything I can do for you? Anything you can do for me? I'm like, maybe save my life? Well, it was a strange question.
I would have asked for coffee, but that's.
In fact, I got it later on. It's a longer story, but it's an interesting story. So I said, yes, sir, there is. I need to see my guys. He said, Kurt, don't worry about it. They're all being taken care of. We have the best surgeons in the Army. They all send their best regards, and don't worry about it. We're just here to get you home. He says, sir, you don't understand. I've got to see my guys. And so he left. He came back about 20 minutes later. He says, come with me. So he took me, and I had my t-shirt. I was kind of bloody and stuff. And anyway, so I went to this place, and they pulled. And I remember there were 4 guys on my helicopter. They were wounded. So I was responsible. My rescue was responsible for 4 people being wounded. So they pulled this tent back. I don't know if anybody has inadvertently smelled ammonia. You kind of got this in your thing. Well, when that tent opened up, and I looked in that tent, I gasped. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak, because it was not only my 4 guys on a litter, 1, 2, 3, 4, but there were 3 more, which is the 2 guys that crashed in the Comandancia, and the 4th one was the commander of the little birds who was shot through the chest. So there's 7 people laid down on litters, IVs, doped up, and I go in there, and I don't know what to do. And one of the guys says, he says, I don't know who it was. I think everybody was kind of drugged up. He says, Mose, good to see your face again. And it was. But the guy on the end, I got down on my hands and knees, and I put my hand on his shoulder. And I told him how much I loved him. I told him how thankful I was for saving my life. And then I choked up like I got a mango in my throat. And I just got up and went, these things, about face and out of there. And it was a real guilt trip. I mean, I couldn't imagine that anybody would risk their life for a little old me, and much less 7 guys seven guys. Anyway, so now, Annie, this is.
Well, Kelly, can you and Stan kind of tag team this one and go over how you ended up leaving Stan on the roof with a couple of other guys, and then Stan, you talk about how what it took to extract the target.
So again, the 4 aircraft from the roof, we were in a holding area, and we came back in, and of course, still chaos in terms of bullets and such. And then Chalks 1 and 2 are a little bit delayed getting loaded up, and so 3 and 4, we did a go around, came back in, and the LZ was clean, and so we landed. Chalk 3 got their people out. In the middle of this chaos, you could tell something had happened. That's where Rick Bowman had been shot, one of the pilots, and but it was a dual pilot aircraft, thankfully. And anyway, so they took off, and then my aircraft was getting loaded up, so I was the last one out. And when I tried to pick up the aircraft, it wouldn't fly anymore. And it was basically we outweighed the rotor system in this case.
But the right side, and there's Colonel Bargewell sitting there, and I say, hey, Seattle, that was his call sign, Seattle, we're too heavy, we've got 1 extra. He says, get the machine gun and get off. Yes, sir. Eldon Bargewell was the kind of commander, the kind of leader that, I mean, it was instantaneous respect and do what you're told without question. DSC in Vietnam, Major General. So I went around to the left side and pulled off the guy with the M60, and now Kelly has flown away.
and it's very quiet there. And we're thinking, what are we going to do? And I really wasn't worried about them coming up the stairs to try to get us, had they known that we were up there, because one of my primary tasks was to put this big logging chain that I had lugged up there and went down below and put around a door that led to the roof with a padlock on it. So wasn't too worried about that. But this figure that was over against the opposite wall, it took a few seconds to discern who it was, and it was Colonel Barchwell. You know, a leader, you always hear about a leader. A leader will not do what he has not done, and he will not expect his troops to do something that he will not do himself. And that's the kind of leader he was. We huddle up. Next thing I know, Bargewell's saying, Stan, go down to the end of the cupola or down to the end of the prison and drop the fast ropes off the side. And that was one of our contingencies. If we couldn't get off that roof, we would fast rope off. Fortunately, we had communications with our SAR aircraft that was at Howard, came and picked us up. It was tight for the Black Hawk to get down on the roof there. We got on the Black Hawk and flew back to Howard. Later, we learned that there was a significant number of holes in that Black Hawk that was not able to fly immediately. It was deadlined. So what's amazing about this operation from my perspective relative to no one getting killed, it's a miracle. And the amount of fire that we were taking on that roof and other places in the street, it's just a miracle. It was a godsend that we survived that event.
And when did you first hear Kurt's voice? Or rather, how were you told that Kurt was secured?
You had to do the first part first.
You already did. So, I had no idea. One of the things that gets you through 9 months is never putting all your eggs in any one basket, and hoping but not believing that anything is going to happen when people might say it's going to happen. So I started receiving calls that night about all hell breaking loose in Panama, and all I could think of were some of the another rescue attempt where it didn't work out very well. And I think that was last year's. Anyway, I was more concerned because I knew Kurt's Carcel Modelo was right next door to the Comandancia. So I couldn't watch TV. Nobody had it on TV. I sat and I just prayed. And that really is what kept me going for those 9 months. But this was a different prayer, because all of my thinking and planning and conversations with the agency, with the Marcus Ostrander in Panama, with the people at the Pentagon, with people at the agency, was just gathering information, asking questions, and asking them, if you were me, what questions would you ask the State Department? And I'd play one against the other to find out and gather as much information as I could, so that I was, for me, I like data. So that was the kind of praying and planning I did. But this was different, because now I felt totally out of control. And I remember praying and saying that, God, whatever happens, I'll still believe in you. I'm going to let go. This is in your hands. I can't do anything more. And I had the greatest sense of peace, noticeably. The greatest sense of peace, so noticeable that I looked at my watch. And if you'll recall, when Kurt landed and was the PC in the LZ Juliet, It was 1:45. And that is exactly the time that I had that feeling that things were going to be all right. 5 minutes later, I received a call. Somebody from the agency called me and said, "We have Kurt. We had a few problems getting him out, but he's okay. It may take us a few more days to get him up to you." That's okay. I've waited 9 months. I can wait a few more days. I ran up to tell the children because I had to tried to wake them up, but again, I think their safety mechanism was, don't believe anything, wait till you see it to believe it. And when I woke them up and told them, they were extremely happy. 4 days later, we had Christmas together with Kurt.
That's incredible. So, Kurt, would you mind telling how you walked right past all of the most famous newscasters, and they just didn't even notice you were there?
When it came to the States, I was in a agency, I believe, aircraft, like a commercial, like a little private jet kind of thing, and they didn't tell me where they were going. They wouldn't tell me. So they said we were going to Miami to go through customs. Customs. Okay. So I am bloodied. I've been in this hole.
Your shirt was all covered in blood at that
Correct.
point.
And I go in this little room, and the custom guys in those days had the blue pants with the yellow stripes, badge, and a Glock. The authorities. And they gave me the little blue sheet to fill out your address and everything. And I got this thing, and I really, honest to God, I freaked out because I didn't know where I lived. So I cheated, and I put down my college address. But I did know a zip code. So I knew that the computers would run that address, and that zip code would not go with that address. So I made something up, and I was really scared. And I was clutching this thing. And two pilots were down there with a customs guy, and they're talking something business, and he said, "Do you have anything to declare?" So the guy's pointing to me. So then this guy struts over, and I am, keep in mind, I've been 9 months under the gun, and the guy with the gun rules. Okay, this is the guy with the gun, and I'm very concerned that I'm giving him a document that's fraudulent. It's not real. And I get this thing, and I'm not even looking at him. I'm making no eye contact. I've got my head bowed. And the guy says, "Mr. Muse." I look up. He's got a smile from here to here. And he says, "Mr. Muse, welcome home." I clutched my little blue piece of paper, and I bawled. I cried my heart out because I finally realized 100% sure that I'm going home. You know, I was elated. So then they go out, and so we have to, we go into the little place where they have the pilot does all his stuff, and I go into the bathroom. They give me a new shirt to put on, like some sort of winter shirt, and I take off the bloody shirt and I put it in the trash can. I walk out, and the airport lounge, which is the private airport lounge, is full of all the news people that are wanting to get to Panama. All the news people you saw in the evening news were all in that one terminal waiting to get a flight for the big news in Panama. And I was kind of the big news of the war. And I walked right in front of them with a bloody shirt to the bathroom, undressed in the bathroom, put the thing in the trash can, put on the new shirt, and walked out again. There, the guys are still in their bricks, talking about. And I come in, and the guy says, "Hey, don't you want to keep your shirt?" So I turn around, go back into the bathroom, pick up the bloody shirt, and walk out again, and nobody's off their brick.
So the moral of that story is, if you come to Whiskey and War Stories, you will get the real story, not miss it like the mainstream media did.
You heard me mention about General Bargewell, James Sudreth. Both of those, there were 23 of us, as indicated earlier, went in on that roof, and now there are 21 of us alive, and those two individuals have passed. Kurt mentioned the gentleman that was hit in the head with a rotor, Tommy Caldwell. About 4 months later, down in southern Panama, Tommy was involved in a UH-60 crash that was severe. His back was broken, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since. So I think about those guys a lot, especially those two that have passed. And although this was a heartfelt operation, but it seems as though as guys start to go meet their maker, it's harder to part with them. That's all.
Kurt, do you mind if you asked me a question the other day related to your visit with President Bush, and would you mind if I tell them what you explained to me, what he said?
Yeah, well,
You told me how you sat and you got all that extra time with him. You thought you only had 30 minutes.
I wanted to interview him. Oh, you're gonna say it? I'm saying it.
Yeah, I'll just wrap it up. That
Okay.
Kurt asked me, so he basically he thought he had 30 minutes with the president, former president at that time, and so you tried to get this whole story in 30 minutes, and basically at the end of the time when his secretary came in to you guys out of there, he said, no, tell the next people to wait, bring the entire staff in here and get comfortable, and then he looked at you and said, now tell me about the rescue. And then you told that story, but you asked me this. You said, when you finished telling him about the rescue, he looked at you weeping,
Yes.
and he asked you a question.
He was sitting like right here, and it was a 15-minute story, real quick. And as I was telling the story, he was weeping, and he took my hand when it was all over in front of his entire staff, and he held my hand in both of his hands, and he says, Kurt, where do we get these men? The President of the United States of America is in absolute awe of our Special Operations Forces. He, the President of the United States, did not know all of the little details that went into this. He got the macro picture, but when he heard about all the heroics of all these people, of all those aviators, of all those Army guys, he was in awe, and he was speechless. And everybody in that room had moist eyes. And I just share that with you so that you know that there are some governments that absolutely understand the plight of our military, and they cry at night. They understand what we're going through. They understand, and they want the best for us. And I'm very anxious to get back to that kind of a feeling in our government.
Yeah. We're going to introduce one more Eldon Bargewell, someone whose reputation precedes them, and someone that truly, for someone that was just given the highest honors in the special operations community, we're honored to have him in our presence tonight. And at this point, I would like to offer Major General Gary Harrell the opportunity to come up here, offer a toast to these men, and give the last word on Operation Acid Gambit.
You know, these stories are not stories. there are people living their lives and sometimes giving their lives for the nation. And I would like to say some more stuff, but I can't, because they told me not to tell them. And some of this stuff is important, and I'm not going to break that. So I thought it's good to see you guys again. Sorry, rascals. But it's a real pleasure and to be able to work with this level of folks, because they're not everyday people that just walk in off the street and go, "Hey, how you doing?" Doesn't work that way. There's a lot of hard work and effort going into that. And the reason, again, that they're doing that is so you can go home at night and go to bed. You don't have to be Kurt Muse, who I admire a lot. But they are top-notch people. And if you ever meet one of them, just pat him on the back. For God's sake, don't hit him. You won't like it. Again, there are a lot of things that go into these types of missions. And just about everything you could do was done in this mission that they just told you about. And so I want to thank my lovely wife, who has put up with me for a long, long time. And I'd ask for you to raise a toast to the people that are out in the dark and keeping us safe.
I want to thank everybody that came to speak, tell this story. I can tell the story is dyed in the wool. It's something it's so very personal. I know you've told it in various formats, but we're very, very honored to have you all together. It was a perfect blend of roles that people played in that to unpack this story for this audience, and truly we're honored. Can we get the closing stuff up here?